Julius Jewell is the co-founder of the fashion brand Heliot Emil. Heliot Emil has been recognized as one of the most successful up-and-coming brands in recent years. In a couple of years, Julius and his brother turned the Heliot Emil brand into an international success story. And all of this before they turned 30 years old. They went from making clothes in a small studio by themselves to being stocked in over 100 stores worldwide. The following is a short clip from our conversation together for the Beyond Fashion Business podcast.
Okay, and speaking about your personal evolution, how has your responsibility, because you're predominantly responsible for the creative aspect of the brand, but how has your responsibility and relationship with the brand evolved since, especially now, because I think now the brand is really becoming a business, right? In terms of size, in terms of growth, in terms of systems and processes. So how has your relationship with the brand evolved from being purely creative driven or mostly creative driven to now that you understand that you're creating an entity with almost a life of its own?
Yeah. I mean, it's clear that you understand that process, but it's not, like that everyone maybe doesn't understand what goes into that, because going from being so deeply hands-on to then being sort of like managerial to now being sort of like structural, like like you take steps up the ladder, and now you're really trying to sit in the helicopter and look at all aspects of everything that you're doing. So at the same time, like you're a manager, you're responsible for the people that are involved in the business. You're also responsible for where they're going inside of the company, and keeping that afloat. But you're also responsible for setting the direction of where things are going. And I think this is where, like a lot of creatives, they also start to struggle because they get too frustrated with becoming like managers of their own uh things more
Creations,
than
yeah.
just like creators, and like, yeah, I think that we're in this position right now as exactly what you were saying, that it's becoming a business, and there are a lot of people within the business that rely on, your uh, the revenue of the company and the decisions that you make, and it's not just like, oh, we want to do this, that could be fun, let's go and like do that. Like there are a lot of structural things and like planning and things that go into it that can become, for a creative person like myself, very sort of like limiting or feel a bit constraining. So I think it's also important for me that I take this as a challenge, obviously,
Mhm.
and like grow with it, but at the same time also put up some solutions where you have the freedom to do creative inputs and to continue this creative approach as well, so you don't lose touch with
Mm.
those things. So I'm still very heavily involved in the creation of the pieces, and I make sure to have time to review everything, and to like come up with ideas and those kind of things, because that's important to me, and it's important
Right.
that like I continue to be involved in those things and don't just like completely let go and sit all day and do managerial structural things, right?
Of course. Yeah, so early on in the journey, it starts as I'm a creative with a need of expression or a need to create something specific, right? But it feels more like a project that you might do, after high school when you were young, right? And
Hmm.
if the project goes very well, it starts evolving and it starts growing and it slowly starts becoming a living organism. And your responsibility as the leader of this evolving organism evolves, right? Your roles change. You stop from being, okay, I was just doing this for fun and I was purely doing the activities in the way that I wanted. But now this is turning into an organism that's alive, that's made up of employees and entities that are breathing. So now I have a responsibility to evolve with it as well. And that evolution will come in different vision, of course, but mainly in different skill sets and different activities and different responsibilities. And a lot of people struggle with that because, again, people have this idea that it's just going to be a fun project forever. But the difference between small brands and bigger brands are, they evolve into this life form of its own and their leaders evolve with them. So that is what the actual process looks like and kind of like the challenges that go with it.
Exactly. And I mean, it sounds a bit sad for a creative person that that's the direction that it's going. And I think also a lot of people thrive in just having these like small, like businesses that don't grow out of their comfort and control, and I see that, like I understand why that would be appealing as well, because you get to be involved constantly. But if you really have the ambition of doing something that's different and taking things to the next level, then I think you have to have like a vision that it becomes bigger than you. And you have to have that in mind, that if you have to be involved constantly, it will never touch more than what you can be involved in. And that is just limiting. And at some point, you have to let go. And some people let go too soon. And, like it's not, let's say, at a stage where other people can take over and grow it from there. I think there are some brands that are, examples of that, but also some people don't let go ever, or like too late, and it never grows into becoming, the potential brand that it could have been. So it's really also about managing when is the right time to start to grow your brand for real, and get to that next level. Yeah, I think that's a huge part of this journey, and learning when is the right time to let go of certain parts of this organism, this living organism.
Of course. So a mixture of awareness and timing. Awareness of yourself in order to understand, is this really what you want to pursue? Because you need to understand the things that are associated with evolving to this level. And secondly, understanding that timing is important because you need a transition at the right times. Interesting. And
Exactly.
before we get into the actual, because I do want to cover sort of like the steps and the time so that people that are early in the process can sort of like have an idea of what that looks like. But let's pin that for a second. Have you ever thought about your intrinsic motivations of why you are pushing things this far? Because again, you're a creative, right? And you come from I mean, I think your dad is, your mom's a teacher and your dad is like a researcher or something like that, or a professor, or
Something like that. Yeah.
right. So
How do you
they're
know that?
not.
That's
I do my
crazy.
research. I do my research. So, so right, you don't come from this like crazy entrepreneurial family where you're driven by this constant sense of perfection or ambition. So, what are those intrinsic motivations? Because early on, I mean, it was again, every creative starts with, dude, I just want to get into fashion. Sure, I want to make money, right? Who doesn't? But I just want to make cool stuff with cool people, right? But then that evolves. So, what is your intrinsic motivation so far?
um, great question. And I think it's super important that people ask themselves this question as well, like, and what are your intrinsic values? Like what are the things that pushes you to do certain things? And for me, uh a very deep sort of like intrinsic value for me is learning. And I think I've always been super fascinated with constant involvement. So really sort of like evolving from one world to another, and like like not in the sense of becoming an expert, but becoming knowledgeable about a lot of different things. So like I used to be in the advertising industry, and here the biggest force that you can have is really to be super well rounded in everything. So knowing a lot about or a little about a lot, right? Because then you have an insight into what that world is like when you're then communicating a product. So if you know about why certain people do certain things, or like what is the funny insight into people who have this kind of lifestyle or whatever it might be. And I've always been fascinated with learning and learning about a lot of different things. So that's a huge motivation for me. And then I've also been very fascinated with creating something that's bigger than myself. So wanting to leave sort of like leave something behind that isn't just like myself, but something that can continue to grow. And whether that's like through the company becoming really big, or me creating like a big family, or whatever it might be. For me it's about like leaving something behind when I leave at some point, like leaving something behind,
Right.
some kind of impression, and some kind of like thing that people can still look to when I'm not here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Of course,
Sounds Yeah,
legacy and consistent development, and you as a
yeah,
person and the challenges that come with it.
yeah. I mean, those are my intrinsic values. I don't think that everyone has that same, like urge or same. There might also be some people that are more,
And some people,
um,
and sorry to interrupt you, but I think a
no,
lot of people think that those are their intrinsic motivators, but you can't
yeah,
really know if those are your intrinsic motivators until you're faced with the reality of the emotional difficulty of those being your intrinsic motivators, right? So you have to be very real with yourself.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think also sometimes, in this day and age, a lot of people want their intrinsic motivators to be very noble, and to feel like they're driven by, like a purpose that's in some way,
Altruistic,
shape, or
yeah.
form. Yeah, like something that's going to unify the world. But really, when it comes down to it, maybe they just want to be happy themselves, and that's through whatever it might be. And obviously the most classic one is that people think that money is like a value, or like an intrinsic value, material things, like or even whatever it might be, that can be like your intrinsic motivator. But I think once you understand that money has zero value if it's not in one shape or form exchanged into something else, like
Right.
it in this actual form, like money is worthless. Like it's only because we have created a system where you are able to trade that money for something that you actually value, something that brings you
Right.
value. And that's not a material thing. Again, it's sort of like something that will bring you to a certain state of that value.
Of
um,
course.
but yeah, I mean, yeah, for me, I'm fascinated with learning, discovering new things. I love to create, and that's like part of the importance for me is that I continue to create something, and then ideally, I want to leave something behind that is meaningful to more people than just how I impacted the world.
Interesting. Okay. And before we go back to the pin question of the steps and the evolution of the organism, and so that we can shift the conversation to something a little bit more specific and practical
Hmm.
for people and for listeners, I do want to ask, What about your personal sense of responsibility as a business owner versus a creative? Because I know you have a business partner, you know, your brother, and he mainly takes care of all the business aspect. But again, your responsibilities to create this business that is an organism also evolve. So how has that shifted? Has it been more at the beginning? It was, you know, I was trying to pursue my creative vision, and everything that I was doing on a practical level was to build that vision into fruition. And now my responsibility has shifted into how can we develop this creative vision as a whole, as a brand, as a business, and how can I manage the people that maybe are even more talented on the day-to-day level than I am to create this vision? Like how has everything evolved creatively and also from a business perspective?
Well, I mean, it's very much that. Like what you're saying is that, you know, like your role is now shifted to ensuring that the overall umbrella still holds everything that goes into it, and that the business perspective fits within that umbrella, so that you're not just like working on this project that's over here and then the business team is working on a project that's over there, but that you combine those two factors and that you ensure that the products that you're making are both you know, sustainable from a perspective of like it's a business that needs to grow, but also at the same time pushing a creative incentive. um, and I think, you know, like certain things I have stuck to, and I've said like this is something that I think we need for the creative side in order to grow, and they don't make sense from a business perspective. And then further down the line, they start to make sense because then we educate and we grow our customer base to that point.
Hmm.
So a very specific example is like our tailoring, which from the start has been uh, extremely high level. So we hired like an expert in tailoring. We created tailoring pieces with some of the best manufacturers here in Europe, from some of the best materials from, you know, like the LVMH group, like dead stock material, and created the same level of tailoring that you would see at, you know, a French luxury house. I'm not going to mention any names, but that's the level of quality that we started with. And from the beginning, it did not make sense from a business perspective. It was not financially like sustainable to do something like that. But in order to push the boundaries and in order to create something that was like next level, like a lot of our tailoring is very complex and has a lot of like pieces and components. And these tailoring manufacturers, they're not used to working with that many components, and they are tailors, they're like experts. So every little piece that you change in this equation will add a lot at the end of the build, because it's not just like another manufacturer, it's like a tailoring manufacturer, which will charge you X amount more because of the level of expertise that is inherited with creating tailoring.
Right.
So from a business perspective, it didn't make sense, but from a creative perspective, it was like something that I felt would tell the story of what we're trying to do in a very sort of precise idea, because it was this perfect balance of industrial elegant. It was a combination of the functional world combined with the elegant world of tailoring. And
Right.
this was like, you know, like the perfect way to tell that story through clothes. And then cementing that season after season and continuing to grow that, we've actually now managed to make it into a financial success as well, and still do tailoring at a very high level for both men's and women's, and managed to make it into something that is good for the business. So that's a very sort of precise example of
Hmm.
how to balance the two worlds of like the business side and the creative side. But sometimes it's also fails. You know, like sometimes you're pushing something that you really want to do, and from a business perspective, it's not financially, sustainable to do something like that. And then you have to figure out another solution for it where it can both be something that you can create again and again, meaning it's like a financial good decision, or at least like sustainable, like is not like putting you in debt every time you do it, and you
Right.
try to continue to
Yeah, it's
do
an
it even
experiment.
though
It's
it's
an
not
experiment that you
working.
can continue doing. It's not an experiment that's
Exactly.
giving you massive returns or any returns, but it's an experiment you can continuously keep on doing. Okay.
Exactly.
And the benefits of getting the experiment right on the long term outweigh the risks of running the experiment consistently.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And sometimes,
So,
like it's good, and sometimes it's it's
yeah,
bad.
interesting. Wow, so many questions. So,
Mhm. Feel free to interrupt. I just keep on jabbering if
no, no,
I'm
no,
not
no. It's just
interrupted.
my
So
curious nature. There's so many. That happens to me every time. As when people talk, I just have question after question popping up to my head. But I know that the guests really want to go back and listen to the steps of the actual building process. So I'll stop that part there. Um, but yeah, I mean, just to conclude what you said, the the nature of this industry is very complex, and the complexity of the brands always grow exponentially with the brand. And when you look at different variables within the brand, whether it be the creative aspect or the business aspect, or even more specific, right? What is the connection between the sales that we're doing in this specific category that we're working on, right? If you try to analyze and compare them in isolation, it might not make sense, but it's just like an orchestra. You need to have unity as a whole. If you analyze how the violin sounds with a specific instrument, they might be a little bit of inconsistency, but your role is to have these different tests, have a lot of these different instruments playing with each other, and then seeing what the actual result looks like, because the result as a whole is the same. It's a symphony, but the responsibilities and the relationship between each others are different because they're different instruments with different sounds
exactly
and
that.
different objectives. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.